I think one of my biggest regrets in life was my ignorance towards my own mental health. I would never be able to take mental health as a idea seriously. And funny enough, I used to laugh at it when I was younger. And now I look back at myself and I realize that I basically question everything and anything that happened to me in my life. I've always lived with the notion that you can just practically ignore anything that happens to you, regardless of how bad it is. And if I'm being honest, it has been probably one of the worst decisions I've made because, not as a man, not only from a social media aspect, but from a cultural and family aspect, you aren't meant to let out your emotions. You aren't meant to be seen as vulnerable. You're supposed to be seen as strong. Um, so I would just be quiet. I would just bottle up my issues. Now, I wouldn't really think much of it, and honestly, I would just ignore it and move on with my day. I would hear about mental health all the time, but it just, even though I was going through problems within my life, I just never decided that it would be good to talk to other people about it. And I would say nowadays, my mental health isn't exactly deteriorating, but it has been on a roller coaster, and I think this is mainly due to me being so ignorant about opening about my feelings and what's really going on in my head. I have a completely different personality when it comes to talking to people outside, and it's realistically just a mask, that's just covering up who I actually am. Um, and I think this is one of the most unhealthiest addictions I have, the idea and or the addiction of not wanting to open up, of being scared to open up. I would have so many friends to talk to, but it just never felt normal to let stuff like that come out, the sad thoughts come out because I had the fear of being viewed differently, being judged. I cared a lot about my how people viewed me as a person, and I didn't want to be seen as a loser or a bum. But everyone has their own breaking points, and I eventually reached that point where I had to cry or I had to just ignore everything and anything that happened around me and just be by myself. And I would say I was just always scared. I would just be scared to say my concerns just because people would feel different about me. And this really down to the idea of self-sabotage. It's a ideology that I never realized I did on a consistent basis, and I would say that self-sabotage is basically the idea where you somehow create your own problems or subconsciously start doing bad habits without the intention of actually wanting to hurt yourself. And that these bad habits could be your eating problems, your eating habits, your procrastination problems. If you're not really hitting the gym, your sleep, you know, these are all issues that I've had. And I feel like every time my life is going up, I feel like I somehow just start falling back into bad habits, no matter what. And I would say that has affected my school life. It has affected my friendships, my relationships, my social life as a whole, and it caused me to have a never-ending hole within myself that I couldn't fix. And eventually, I've realized that I need to value the ability to talk to others about my problems. And I would say the main message is that what I'm trying to get to is that your mental health is important. Regardless of what social media says, regardless of what the cultural norms are, you can't get anywhere in life if you're always feeling down. You need to have a strong mental, regardless of what it is, regardless of what you're trying to progress towards. You can't be overwhelmed with your own emotions. And I think this is something that has been stripped away from this generation. The idea of opening up, it's been so frowned upon still. I would say that please focus on your mental health. And one of the best healing factors for a person is just the ability to talk and express themselves without fearing the opinion of others. I you don't always need someone to respond to you or be able to give you advice about your problems, but just to be there to listen. And to everyone that's watching the video, you aren't ever truly alone. And there's always someone to talk to. There's always someone to talk to, regardless of if you think you might not have anyone. You don't necessarily always have to be best friends with someone if there's a genuine problem going on in your head. I think that's something that people haven't realized, that you don't always need to go to your best friends for issues like that. You can sometimes go to people that you aren't too familiar with, because sometimes those people can have the best, advice towards your issues. But yeah, thanks for watching this video, guys, and I'll see you guys next time.